With that, Michelle, welcome.
Thank
We are
you.
so glad that you are here. I have had the honor of knowing Michelle for almost 20 years and in various capacities. But rather than me reading a bio, I will just ask you if you would introduce yourself to everyone. And in that introduction, kind of walk us through your career and how what brought you to the Community Foundation.
Absolutely. So thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and love seeing familiar faces. As James said, I'm turning my chair. Sorry, James has given me instructions not to turn this way because I'm blocking the people here. So I'm going to look this way, but talk to all of you. So I grew
Imagine
up,
the table
I know,
continues
so-
on down.
okay. I will say I don't want to look at that camera because, you know, the zoom in of yourself right there.
Got to work the angles.
So I'm going to work the angles. So anyway, but I grew up in Ohio and moved to Georgia after I graduated high school. As was mentioned, I did my undergrad at UNG, did a double major in marketing and management, and then later got my master's at MBA at Brenau University. So both kind of local colleges, which I love both of them. Started in a banking career. So I was in banking for about, I guess, 10 or 11 years. And then I went to Uganda on a medical mission trip with my church. And it was kind of the best trip and the worst trip I ever went on because the need was so great, but the folks had this story about them that it's hard for us to understand because we have so much. So when I came back from that trip, really felt like I needed to take kind of my experience and education and talents and all of those things into kind of the nonprofit sector. And so kind of the first role I took outside of banking was for an international nonprofit. I was their U.S. finance manager. They had international schools in China. So talking about jumping into the fire of it, learning all about the financials of nonprofit work. Then moved into more of a development role, which is fundraising, worked for the United Way Forsyth County for a couple of years, worked for United Way of Greater Atlanta, and that's where I worked prior to coming to this role. I'd worked in different positions, and the last one I was there was their senior director of volunteerism. So I ran their volunteerism department, which was actually one that companies would hire to do extensive volunteer projects for their team members. So it was a kind of a profitable part of what we did. One night I was reading the news, and all this time I lived in Hall County, so I was commuting to Atlanta, and in one case my first job was in Union City. So all this commute, so I had kind of gotten to the place where I either was going to move to Atlanta or, you know, change roles. And so I was reading the news one evening before bed and read about Jim Mathis, who was the president and CEO of the North Georgia Community Foundation, and his retirement. And in that it had a job description. And when I read the job description, it was as if somebody had written it for me. It had all the things I loved about banking and the financial world with all the things that I loved about helping our community. And, you know, so I thought, well, you know, I've never been a president and CEO before, but I'm going to submit my information and see what happens. And I think there were 90 some applicants, and you know, kind of went through this whole process. It was the most extensive process. James was on that committee, give them a lot of credit for how they did it, but ultimately was offered the role and accepted the role. October will be 8 years ago, which I still don't know how that happened. As I said to Cookie earlier, I haven't aged at all in that time. So, so been with the North Georgia Community Foundation for 8 years. When I started, we were about $42 million in charitable assets. We're kind of like a philanthropic bank. And now we're sitting at about $122 million in assets. So we've almost tripled in size in that time and just had great growth and opportunity, and love to work with communities like the one we're in right now, which is Forsyth County. So I can learn more about the Community Foundation, or I can, you know, stuff.
Well, let's start with that.
Okay.
So I know from my time working with the Community Foundation on the board, and Michelle's right, that process was wasn't necessarily all that lengthy, but it was a very intense process and I want to revisit that because I think that's sort of me sitting on sort of the other side of the table. I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, but tell us a little bit about the Community Foundation, a little bit about its history, how it operates, and how it maybe relates to all of us.
Absolutely. So most folks have heard of a community foundation, but they have no idea what we do. And to be quite honest, I was that way prior to kind of learning more about this role back when I was interviewing. But, you know, we are like a philanthropic bank. We work with two different audiences. our fund holders are prospective fund holders, which are usually individuals or companies, sometimes nonprofits, and the nonprofit community. And so we hold a lot of different types of charitable funds, donor advised funds, scholarship funds. We have what are called field of interest funds, a lot of different ways that people can take their charitable dollars, open a fund with us. It's invested, so there's a return on an investment that they earn, which allows them then to have more money to grant out to programs and nonprofits that they're passionate about. And so when we talk about, the fact that we have $122 million in assets, that's made up of about 500 of those type of funds. And so to give you an example, with scholarship funds this year, we gave out from the Community Foundation through our fund holders that hold scholarship funds about 269 scholarships for about $560,000. So that is one of the pieces of what we do. Our mission is really to help people and nonprofits invest generously in the lives of those who call North Georgia home. And we do that in a lot of different ways, scholarships being one of those. We have a lot of our own grant programs that we run. When I first started, our community grant cycle gave out about $25,000 a year. Last year, we gave out about $680,000, and that's from our own endowment that we hold. And that went to about 45 different nonprofits. We just closed our cycle about a week ago for our application cycle for the community grants program, and we had about 127 applications this year that'll be reviewed, and those announcements will come later October. So we do things like that as far as the grant programming. $12 million came out of the Community Foundation last year into programs within North Georgia and nonprofits there. So we really feel like part of our mission is to work behind the scenes, helping nonprofits achieve their mission and helping those individuals, families, companies really kind of achieve what they want to do philanthropically. And we started right before I came on board. My predecessor started with actually Mary Helen, who's in the room, with a group of folks here from Forsyth to create our affiliate, which is called the Forsyth County Community Foundation. And there's a wonderful affiliate, a council of folks that from this county, which James is one of those, and Mary Helen and many others who really helped to drive that. And our goal is really to raise unrestricted dollars here so that we can create a community grant program just for Forsyth County. And so there's a lot of excitement about that as well. And so that kind of gives you the Cliff Note version of what we do. It is something that folks use us for the tax benefit of that. There's a lot of ways they can donate stock or land or businesses as they're selling to avoid capital gains, and lots of benefits of that. And really, like I said, it marries all the things I loved about, working in finance with, the work that I can do to make a difference in our community.
Very good. So, you came from various organizations that were in this space, but, as you noted, Community Foundation's a very different beast. But still in that space, as you were coming into this role, and I think this is correct. You had not directly reported to a board of directors.
That is correct.
So, tell me about that transition and what were some of the lessons learned in that? And because I certainly know from my role, and there's other folks in here in that role, that is an adjustment to make, and how you made that adjustment and how you see that relationship with the board and you and the work of the foundation.
Absolutely. So, prior to that, I had not worked with the board. So coming onto the Community Foundation, reporting to a board of directors. And I think when I was hired, they did it really well because I started in October. At that time, our board chair was a year term. So instead of me coming in under someone for a couple of years, the next board chair really kind of took that space, which was really great. As anyone who is a nonprofit knows, and probably as anyone who's been a board member knows, there's sometimes challenging issues that can arise in those situations. And so, learning, one of the things that was interesting to me at that time, again, that year term, learning your board chair, getting to know them, getting them to understand, what we do is very complex. So it took me a year to figure out what we do, and I run the organization. So having a board member who comes and has, 6 meetings a year and how you teach them that. So the learning curve of that and getting to know them, about the time that they got it and you guys were connected, you started over again, right? And so that was a little bit of a challenge for us. And I think one of the things we struggle with is we had such growth so quickly, right? So when you go from 42 million to 122 million, you are a small community foundation to a large community foundation And how do you get everyone who's always been involved with a small community foundation to understand the differences and what it's like to be there? So, we had to go through some process with that. And I think, reporting to a board, I think the communication, the structure, all of those things are really critical, and the culture of the board. And so, we, in our strategic plan in 2019 that we developed, we really made it an intentional goal of kind of revitalizing and shifting the culture a little bit, and making sure that things were structured. So I'll say this, there's a lot of nonprofits in the room, so they'll probably relate to this. Under every board chair, even things like what my performance review were done differently depending on who your board chair was. So this year it might look this way, the next year it might look this way. Your goals of your organization might shift this way one year, and then the next year, because this person isn't, might go this way. And so we really spent a lot of time, and I had an incredible board chair who's been a mentor for me. He was in my board chair for 2020 and 2021, who helped us to really structure things that, the mission of the organization was driven by the strategic plan, not by who was the chair. The executive committee really drove things with the leadership of that chair. The processes and things, like my review and other pieces, became structured, so it didn't matter who was in that. So whether I walked away tomorrow, whether the board chair walked away tomorrow, it all stayed consistent and built the culture. Another thing I loved is he built the culture around caring about my team, which was something that, you kind of had hit or miss depending on who your chair was, right? So now our board is very centrally focused on, of course, how we do as an organization, all the governance pieces of it, staying out of the operational side of it, which was great. So we kind of learned our partnership, and yet they pour into me, into my team in a way that I think is incredible. So it's been, it was a challenging thing there to get there. And I think we've built this amazing partnership that I think is, you can see the effect of that is the success we've had as an organization.
Very good. So as you, both the board and you have gone through that transition, when you look back at that and think about, the elements of, some of that's driven by the board, some of that, it's a bit of a dance,
Absolutely,
is what
yeah.
you're describing. When you look back at that, what are the elements of what you were bringing to the table that, one on both sides that help drive that along, and then the other side, what you would have done differently.
Absolutely.
The things that you of course, I feel like I learned everything the hard way.
Me too.
But
Yeah.
but what are on both sides of that when you look back at that?
So I think one of the challenges, I replaced someone who'd been with the organization for 16 years, right? So it was his organization and his board, and he was incredibly gracious and wonderful with that transition. He stayed on a year after I did. But I think that first year was a little bit confusing for board, because here you have the president emeritus, right? And Mary Helen was on the board at the time. She's nodding yes, she understood that, related to that. So you had the president emeritus, and then you had me as the new president and CEO. Very different styles. I have great respect for the fact of how Jim handled that, who's my predecessor, because I'm not sure I would have been able to just sit there and watch someone come in and take over and move things around and redecorate my office and change things. But he did that. But I think that was a confusing time for the board. And so I think in one ways where Jim, he had all these years to establish trust. Here was this brand new person. And my first board chair was a brand new board chair. He had never been one before. So I think we kind of learned together in some ways. And while that probably was good in some ways, it might've been challenging for, that. And I think, the board saying, okay, wait, this is a person we don't know. We have to, build trust. And me coming in saying, well, I earned this role and I am trustworthy. So I think we had to learn how to trust each other, right? And the fact that this is how Jim had done it for 16 years. I'm flipping it upside down, and we're going to do it this way now. I think that was a really hard piece. So I think from what I could have done better, probably I'm a super high type A. And I've learned about myself that I'm also a very fast thinker, talker, decision maker. So, when I make a decision to do something, I'm ready, let's go, we're going. And then I'll turn around where is everybody? Because I haven't spent time, sit down and talk to them about what we're doing. I had to learn this, and I had to learn this and change that behavior. But I think at that time, I was like, I'm ready to go, let's go, here we are. And then I kind of left the board a little bit behind and not taking the time to really lay out my plan and all of that. So I think I could have done a better job of painting my vision versus expecting them to just jump in, jump on board with me and let's go, right? So I think that's probably something I could have done better. I think the board probably could have had a better structure, understanding the difference between governance and operations. And I see that a lot in a lot of nonprofits we work with, is that there's this crossover that happens, and that when board gets into operations, that can complicate things. So I think there were some pieces on that probably from a board perspective could have been better. And I think that's where, at the time, can I say who my board chair was in 2020? Is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
So Rob Fowler, if you guys know Rob Fowler, he is.
Oh, no, not his name.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry.
But Rob Fowler, he runs an insurance agency over in the Gainesville area, Turner Wood Smith. He's I think the president there. But I think we came together with the same mindset of it's time to put us all in the same thing and get it together and do it the right way. And so it was very intentional, and we planned it out to get the board to the place that they understood who we were today, respecting the history of where we came from, because that's so important to remember the legacy of those who came before, but that we don't live in that space anymore. So to get them there, to get the clear boundary of this is my role and my team's role, this is the board's role, and to clearly divide that and set those structure up so that it's that way. I think those are the pieces that really helped us to get there. So definitely, there are definitely things I could have done better. I think that there's things that the board could have done better. But what I can say is through that, learning the hard way, because, that's how I do things too, we were able to really create what it is today. And it's an incredibly healthy board. It's an incredibly healthy, structure. I have my board chair terms are 2 years now. My board chair who rolls off this year, we have the next one and the next one already like under wraps. They're serving on the executive committee, so they're learning all of these things before they take over, and it's all very intentionally done. And so I give a lot of credit to Rob's leadership for that. And I learned so much from him about many things, but that was one of the things was, the way that he was really able to make that happen.
James, could I add
Please,
something
please.
as the board member who's
Yes,
sitting
yes,
next to this? So,
yes.
I think from a board perspective, as a board member, there was an excitement and there was an anticipation of the great things that were going to happen. And knowing that Michelle was there and in place and ready to lead, I think you're selling yourself short.
We're trying to say that.
People were ready to move to the next step. That was a strong organization, but it needed to go to the next step, as many organizations find themselves in that position, particularly when someone has started it and has a great sense of ownership. And so don't sell yourself short, because people were ready to follow. And I think as board leaders and as CEOs of organizations, that's what you're there for, is to lead. And so I think from a perspective of how you handled it, I think you did it well.
Thank you.
And can I add one other thing about when you were talking about what the Community Foundation does? I think one of the great things that doesn't get a whole lot of publicity is your willingness to hold funds for organizations that are not yet a 501c3.
Right. Physical sponsorships.
It's the sponsorships, and that's huge. And I think benefits the communities. They just don't know about it. So could you explain that a little bit?
Absolutely. So we have a fund type that's called a fiscal sponsorship. And it kind of serves two purposes. One is for what I call up and coming nonprofits. So folks who want to become a nonprofit or in the process of becoming a nonprofit, but they haven't gotten that official tax status yet. And so that organization, can come under the umbrella of the Community Foundation. We allow them to have a fund with us. They can fundraise for the initiative or their mission that they've defined of their organization. So they're not having to sit there and wait, then go and get started. While they're putting all their documentation together, building their board, doing all of that, they can be out there fundraising and paying any expenses necessary and doing all the pieces to get them started. And so, if you look at organizations like the Georgia Mountain Food Bank, that's how it started out of the Community Foundation. There's a lot in the Gainesville area, Amped Kids, North Georgia Works, many nonprofits that are standing today started in this way with us because it allowed them that we do it for typically a year, allowed them that way to do that. The second way we use this fund is for groups that really never need to be a nonprofit, or maybe they do a huge event every year or something that is, is great impact on the community, but it's not something that needs to be a nonprofit. So I'll give you a couple examples. We have this amazing food drive organization called Sunshine Seniors. They are the Chick-fil-A of like a food assistance program. So they do kind of a drive-through program at a church, and they're amazing. They're an organization that's been volunteer run for 25 years. They're a fiscal, we're a fiscal sponsor of them. They're, under us because they don't want to do all the nonprofit stuff. They want to get the food in, they want to serve the community, they want to do that, and they want us to handle the rest of it for them. So they don't ever need to be a nonprofit. So they sit under us as a fiscal sponsorship. There are a lot of, we have to watch these funds very closely. As you can imagine, the risk to us of allowing people to use our tax status, right? So there's a lot of, pieces with that. Our board has to approve those, but that's one example. Another is, here in town. And do you want to share a little bit about the one that we had here in the town about the hospital during COVID that was?
Yes, well, I've been involved
Yeah.
actually with two.
Yeah.
The first one was my husband's a veterinarian and started the Friends of the Forsyth County Animal Shelter. They were trying to raise funds to put a special covering in the runs. No need to be a 501c3, didn't want to come under Forsyth County. And so went through the Community Foundation, which was wonderful because it gave the organization, well, not the semi-organization, a way to reach people who are interested in that particular field. And we got several donations just from people who had funds there. The second one was during COVID when we wanted to recognize the employees at the hospital to buy T-shirts for every employee. Just thank you for what you do. The community recognizes you. We use the chamber as the PR mechanism and the Community Foundation as the sponsor, and we raised several $1,000s to buy, what was it, James, 3,500 T-shirts?
I believe it was 3,500, yeah.
T-shirts that we presented to the staff. We had asked Lynn Jackson what would be the best gift, and she said we allow them to wear T-shirts with their scrubs if they are pertaining to the hospital, and they love to wear T-shirts because then they don't have to wear the scrub top. So that was a really big deal, and so that probably those are the two biggest ones that I've been involved in. But it's just a wonderful vehicle for ad hoc groups to be able to come together, fund something, and then move on.
Yeah. We have one, I'll give you another example from Raven County that there were folks, so the sheriff's office there apparently was using, and I know nothing about guns, but like 20-year-old Walmart kind of guns, if that was their protection, right? So there was a community group who wanted to raise money to get them the right, protection that they needed, the right type of guns. So they did, they formed that. We became, we did this for them as a fiscal sponsorship. They raised the money, we were able to do that. And they were like, we really like this. So then they're like, well, they need to have a drone because when people get lost in Raven County, in all of the hills and all of the space out there, we need to have drones for searching that. So that same group raised money for that. We're able to buy the drones for the sheriff's department. So there's a lot of different ways that people use these. And it really is an incredible thing because it can make that impact. So I appreciate bringing that up. So yeah, those are called fiscal sponsorships.
Well, and that's sort of, that's another example of how, challenging it is to explain what a community foundation is. I mean, it's such an important mechanism to help. And just in the time that I've been involved with Community Foundation, I mean, as y'all were talking, I mean, I can think of at least 7 or 8 organizations with the Arts Alliance and others, but who have done so. Mary Helen, thank you for bringing that up. Well, I want to transition just a minute to something that whether you are in the nonprofit sector or you are in the corporate sector or you are in the government sector. And I've been asking this question at all of these lunches. Does anybody here have a challenge finding and keeping people? I don't know if that's a common problem, but good news for you, of course, but in your line of work. But we that is the universal problem. I was at the Georgia Chamber board meeting is the #1 priority that they are looking at. There's not a sector that it does not impact, and there is no magic bullet. There is no real part of it is a straight up demographic issue where the population is shrinking, but the economy is growing. So when it just emphasizes things like culture, and going to find talent and keep that talent. You've got a remarkable team at the foundation. Talk a little bit about your approach to, I guess we should start maybe with just finding that talent, especially because it is such a unique
Yeah.
entity.
Yeah.
When you go to look for talent, what are you really looking for, and what's your process? How does that process work for you?
Yeah, so we have a staff, there's a total of 9 of us, right? And so it is a really interesting type of job of, what we do in the different ways that it works. And so, I have some former bankers on my staff, and then I have some folks who came kind of from nonprofit and some who just came from different areas. But, starting about the fact of way to find them. Sometimes it's, we win the lottery. I feel like my newest hire, who was we hired in January, we won the lottery. We lucked out. She's 22. I haven't had a lot of success with that kind of age group and what we do. She came in and she's, just incredible. And so she's our scholarship administrator. And so that was kind of the luck of the draw. I think one of the most successful ways that I have been able to find good people is through kind of them knowing someone or the referrals of it, right? I think about, our VP of marketing development, her name is Megan Martin. She worked at our chamber, and she knew someone that knew us, that we were looking, and even the lottery one that I just mentioned, she heard from a nonprofit. They passed along the job description. So I think that's been a successful way to find people. I've been very fortunate that I have a lot of longer term folks, so we have not had to be out there looking the way that I know most folks are struggling with right now. I think the hardest role I will tell you that I had to find was my executive assistant. That was a tough, and I think I made some mistakes in what I was looking for initially because it was a new role and I hadn't really had an executive assistant before. So what I was looking for wasn't right. And so having to learn that, and someone had told me, I called the person, I actually called Tim Chasen, who was the Chasen Group, which was a search firm that the Community Foundation used when I was hired. I was like, how do you find this role? Because, this is what he does. And he told me to go in the school systems. He said, look at your administrative person in the office and imagine what they go through and what they deal with. And that's exactly where Marcy came from on our team, I don't know how to survive without her. So you might want to pray for her because she has to manage me. So I think we've been fortunate in that piece, but having to learn that. And I will say, how do we keep them? I think is a really big piece. To me, team is everything. I don't take, when we talk about the growth we've had, I don't take, I appreciate that I led the effort, but I didn't do it alone. Team is critically important. And we recently we did this Clifton Strengths. I don't know if you guys have ever done those as a team. I am like the anomaly because I don't look like anyone else on my team, but that's intentional because I don't need 9 Michelles. I need Michelle, and then I need these people who have other different skills and talents and things. And so making sure you have the right person and being able to be in a position where, we had someone come in who was incredible in the role, but she outgrew the role like that. It didn't fit her. So we were able to adjust the role to fit her strengths. And, that's, a girl on our team who's been there 5 years. And so her role evolved with her to match her. And I think that's been a successful way of doing it, not being so struck by this is what the job description is, this is what it has to be, but really being open to look and say, wow, this is their skills and experience. Maybe we can shift this a little bit, which fits this person better, but those kind of things. So I think that's one piece. I think celebrating our successes is really critical. When someone on my team does an amazing thing, I make sure people know about it. And our board meetings, we talk about it. I kind of laugh. There's a team member named Margaret. Margaret's been with us about 7.5 years. She's one of my first hires. And when Margaret has an idea, it's usually incredible, but it usually costs us money, right? So we moved to our new offices about a year ago, and we had a build out to plan, and there was this empty suite next to us. And, we had a situation where, large meeting space for nonprofits was a really tough thing to find. And even us, we were kind of doing the musical chairs of where our board meetings were taking place. So we came back one day from carrying all of our stuff in from our board meeting, and Margaret goes, I wonder if we could get a few fund holders to come alongside us and help us fund this space right here to become like a meeting room for nonprofits. And I was like, it's kind of brilliant, right? Fast forward, we now have the NGCF community room. It was funded by 4 of our fund holders. Even the building chipped in and gave us a year of free rent on it. Nonprofits are meeting there. Businesses are renting it, so that helps produce revenue for future. But that all came from this simple idea that she had. And I made sure when we did our open house that people know that. So I think celebrating successes, it's really easy to get caught up in, oh, they didn't do this or they didn't do that right, but taking a minute to really celebrate that. We also go play together. Twice a year, we close the office. My mom comes in and answers the phone for us and, helps people come in. We're a nonprofit. We do what you got to do. We pay her by gift card as a thank you. But we go play because, and this is why I believe that when you get to know someone beyond their title, that when you make a connection, that you start to relate to that person as human and being the person versus the director of whatever, then when there is conflict that happens, because let's be real, there's going to be conflict. We have 9 women who work together. You don't think there's going to be something? But when that happens, because there's that connection beyond that, the way that it's handled is much more constructive and much more effective. They can sit down and actually have conversation about, what the issue is and it be, in a way that strengthens the team. So those are just some of the little things that we do. I think it's when you have the right people, you have to take care of them. And, I think that is a piece that sometimes is lost or, you get so focused on other things, but that is to me, the most important thing we do is build the team and keep that team strong. Because if you have one weak link, let's be real, it's impacting something in your organization.
Well, and something I know there's a fair amount of discussion about is how, particularly in this environment where, there's a lot more jobs than people, and, you're really competing every day to keep the right rear ends in the right seats. And so, but at the same time, there's also this drive of making sure that there's a high level of accountability and driving to outcomes. And often that can be viewed as pulling in 2 different directions. So how do you reach that balance of, either work hard, play hard, or what? How do you reach that balance of, both being caring and, a taskmaster as well?
I think, one of the things is we have a pretty open culture in the sense that, very open about, what our goals are, the things we have to do. I'm a huge planner. This will shock the people who know me, like crazy planner. So, it's very clearly defined what the expectations are. When we sit down at the end of a year and kind of map out the next year and what we're doing, and the people have that, involvement. When we do our strategic plan, there are action items that we've created around what we need to do for that year. And that's drilled down from here's the high level of it. This is what we need to be doing for this year. And these are the people involved in that. And this is the kind of when we're going to do it. So there's an incredible amount of planning that we do to keep that piece forefront, right? So for example, our current strategic plan that we're wrapping this year, Q1, we know exactly what those goals are. We know who's doing that, who's responsible for that work. We report that out to the board. I learned this when I was in banking. The president of the bank at the time made this statement of what gets measured gets done. And I kind of believe that. So when you keep the focus of the measurements there, the other thing we do is we have, coaching sessions. So, most of my team, depending on what their role is about every other week, we're sitting down together and it's an open conversation. They're sharing, they bring the agenda, it's their meeting. They bring the agenda of what they want to talk about. We talk through what those expectations are, where they are, what those goals are, where we are to get those. This is a coaching time. So if there's an area that's kind of, maybe not at the level that it needs to be, we talk through it. It's also a time when I ask them to coach me. What is it that I could do better? What is it? So it is a very kind of open style, culture. And I do think that creates the ability to be able to have both of those. They know that we can have hard conversations and we're going to have hard conversations if we need to, but they also know that I have their back and I'm going to celebrate with them when they do achieve those goals. So, I'm pretty much a what you see is what you get kind of person. And so I think they know that. And I think so that consistency of behavior from me, with what those goals are and those expectations are, but also with the fact that they know that there's going to be that celebration and the time that we pause to appreciate those, it kind of makes that work, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, since I've known you so long, what do they tell you need to do?
So I would say I get some great coaching. It's interesting because it's different for each person. And, when someone comes in, they're like, yeah, right. And the new person, yeah, I'm not going to do that. We know, I've heard that before. So it's always fun. To me, I love when that first time happens, when they do want to talk about something and they really do it. And then they recognize that I'm not going to kind of bow up at them. And that I'm like, okay, wait, tell me more. Some of the things, so I tend to be someone who sees an opportunity and I'm like, oh yes, that's great. Absolutely. We should do that. Right. Not necessarily always thinking about all the things that takes it. So one of the recent coaching I got, we had an idea in January to bring all of the community foundations in the state of Georgia together. Because the CEOs have done that for years. And what an amazing connection that would be for our teams. The people who do scholarships all over Georgia can talk to each other, and the people who do grants all over Georgia. So as the CEOs were having this conversation, I was like, well, we just have this new space. You guys should come here, right? Not thinking about that when you do a 2-day conference of 57 people from 12 community foundations come into your office, you have to build out content and agenda items and sessions for every time period and all of the pieces that go along with that. So the coaching I got was, next time that, that idea comes up, maybe sit down with the group and talk through that before. So that was one piece that was a really good piece of that. And, I think those kind of things, when my team knows that it's safe that they can do that. And again, the rule is it has to be respectful, right? In the same way that I would coach them. So they can't come and go, what were you thinking about that? But they can't come in and say, hey, I really want to talk about this because it made me feel this way or anything like that. And so I love that it's there and we have that openness, but yeah, it's usually those things of slow down, rein in a little bit. My director of strategic initiatives is one who's probably one of the best coaches for me in that sense, because our first year of the strategic plan, we had 47 year one objectives. Yeah, that's me, right? I can do it. She's the one that's like, Michelle, I think these are great, but I really feel like we need to pull it back. So typically that's a lot of the coaching that I get is those kind of things, which is good because I need that balance. And so what that's evolved into is she's now the person that I bounce things off of before I make those decisions. I'm like, all right, let me bounce this off of you. And, how does this seem to you? And it's helped us to do that.
So, and then what steps do you take to create that sort of exactly what you started talking about? I mean, that's probably less common.
Yeah,
to have an organization where that lets people say that,
yeah.
Oh, you can tell me anything until you tell me anything.
Yeah.
And so, what steps do you take that help facilitate
how did I get that
safe space or whatever? But there's an expectation that I really mean it, and and I'm going to do something about it when you share that.
So, I think it had to evolve. So, and again, those of you who know me longer, coming up in a banking environment, which was very corporate, very structured, very regulated, strict, those kind of things, you didn't really show your full self in that, right? Because you had to kind of be on guard and always just be professional. And so I had kind of learned as an early manager, that's what you did. You just, you had this is who you were, there's this line. And as I kind of grew and evolved and understood, more about who I was, what I started realizing is that when you are real with your team, when you will share who you are, truly who you are, the good things, the bad things, I'm not saying you sit down and tell them all your laundry, but I just mean that you talk about, the things that are important to you and the things that maybe you're struggling with and all of that. It bonds the team together in a way that I learned this kind of involving, like I said, just not terribly long ago through this journey at the Community Foundation of what that can do and how that can really strengthen a team when they feel safe to be able to be open with you about things. And so instead of having that, front of I am this, it's the, hey, I am your, partner in this and we've got to do this together. And then when they share that feedback, again, you have to watch everything. You have to watch your body language. There's been times where someone has said something that, it didn't feel great. And I'm like, but being mindful of that, knowing that my role is to lead this organization. And if I bow up at someone because of something they've said to me, I'm defeating the whole purpose of our culture. So allowing that to happen and then talking through it if we need to. And if I have any of that, taking it away and dealing with that alone, because that's my job is, my job is to lead them. And there are times you have to kind of take that in and process it yourself. So for me, it's being able to be real who I am all the time with them and not being one person here, one person there, but being genuinely that way. And I think that's allowed that culture to be that way. And even what I see now is when two team members have conflict, they're following that same thing. They are okay to go to each other and have that conversation and work through that. And then I just hear about it later because they were telling me in their one-on-one about how great this went. So I'm not perfect. I don't pretend to be, but they also know that. And I share with them, what those things I'm great at, but also those things that I'm like terrible at, or the things, I'll give an example. We did a podcast last Thursday that's recorded with the mic. The day before I had to do this video, which got sent out today, by the way, so don't laugh when you look at it. This video that our marketing person wanted to do. I don't know what happens, but when there's a camera and a microphone, I couldn't even take my last name. It's this horrible thing. So, it is something that I laugh about. I had two team members during the filming of, and by the way, when I do make a mistake on the thing, I tend to curse. So, my marketing person is over there with the camera filming from this side because she knows she's gonna have one heck of a blooper, and here I am like standing from this camera trying to be all professional, say all these things, and then I don't know, I get in my head. So, I don't pretend that I don't have those faults, and so and again, I have lots of them. I can list them out for you, but they have the opportunity to laugh at me with me. So when I messed up on that and I said that word, there's Megan over there with the camera and someone else over there laughing, So we just, that's the kind of thing it is. And there's not to say that there isn't a down day or a day that I show frustration, but for the most part, I try to be that. It was a really long answer, I realize.
Well, and part of the reason I'm asking, there's those of you read and listen to Brene Brown, Krishna.
Oh, yes.
Now it's more than she's just a book, it's
Power
a
of
whole
vulnerability.
industry that she's developed. But yes, but really ultimately it's elements of creating culture around you being vulnerable to them and being vulnerable to you and how, which for those of you, I think most of us around this table are from smaller organizations. It's a whole lot easier to do that in a small office than it is in a larger one. And so one of the few advantages of really being able to do that.
One thing I'll add too with that is not only did I, and it was honestly, that book, Power of Vulnerability, was one of the things that allowed me to really start thinking that way. But I'm not only that way with my team, I'm that way with my executive committee.
Yeah.
And so that's also allowed. And again, I think a lot of that stemmed from that kind of what I call the Rob error, because the way that he supported my team and supported me allowed me to kind of put some walls down so that I could learn in different ways that I hadn't before. And one of the outcomes was being able to be vulnerable and real with them, sharing, what's going great, but the challenges. And again, not laying out the laundry list, but being able to be open with them and share those things and laugh about, my ridiculous fear of being on camera, and those kind of things as well, which I think has strengthened that too. And that's allowed them to kind of be that way as well in a professional setting, of course.
So you mentioned, and by the way, the podcast sounds great. There's no cursing, but I'm sorry to disappoint you. Maybe we should have left some in. I don't know. That could have
I
been-
did not curse
but-
there because Mary Helen was sitting there and Brian Tam was sitting there, and those, Brian's a former board member, Mary Helen is a board member, and so that one I did well. But behind the closed door of the
You did do it
my
well.
office,
She didn't
behind
care
that-
if she cursed in front of me.
Yeah, so
I wouldn't know that.
totally would have if it was just us. But I keep joking because Megan has the video. Of it. She just, at some point
Sure.
with it, but yeah.
So when you talk about and the podcast turned out great, it's available through Forsyth Business Radio X. We recorded it next to the store. So but and things like the camera. When you come across those things that you're like, and certainly in your line of work, those things end up being important because they become more and more as time goes on and things change.
Yeah.
So how do you go about addressing that and tackling that and saying, okay, here's something that I gotta prioritize or spend some time?
Yeah, so it's interesting because that one I'm known because we've done these videos, periodically, and every time, my marketing person comes in and says it's time again, I'm like, but they've been spread out, right? So I think having two back to back and the anxiety that I felt in that, I actually I called Megan in last week. I was like, all right, we have to find someone who can help me with this because I can't not be good at this. I have to learn how to be the person I am sitting at a table with people on camera or with the microphone that's right in your face. I have to learn that. So I literally talked to him right before this. I'm like, who do you know? How can you help me with this? Because you have to do that, And so, yeah, I can't, again, I'm not perfect. I don't pretend to be, but when I know those areas about myself that need to be improved, I'm going to find ways to try to improve those, whether it's through coaching, whether it's through finding someone who can figure out what the heck is wrong with me mentally when I do that, whatever it is, those kind of things. Finding that because I can only be as good for my organization as I am in my weaknesses, right? In those areas of that. So my goal is to be really good at the next podcast we do, or the next video I have to do, but I have to find that person. So I'm not going to shy away from those things. I tend to be that bulldozer hitting it head on, and that's what I plan to do in this situation too.
Very good. Well, we're down to just the last very few minutes. So I want to make sure that open it up to anybody, both online or in the room. Any questions from Michelle or topics you want to throw out we need to cover? You want to hear about? Please.
So when you guys were talking about like roles and responsibilities and expectations of board and the nonprofit programmatics, what I guess, how do you get there? But like, what does your board also volunteer in the organization? Or is it, because like our board, we're governance, but we're all volunteers, so how do you stay out of the programmatic if you're volunteering in programs and then discussing it at a board meeting?
That's a
That's
great
actually
question, yeah.
really great question. I think we're a little different because the type of work we do operate more like a bank, so there is not a lot of volunteer opportunities.
Uh-huh.
That said, I talk with a lot of executive directors and do some coaching with them as well. And to be quite honest with you, the biggest frustration I get from them is this issue of that crossover, because what it ends up doing is running the executive director away, because she or he can't be free to do their role. That happens. So I think to your point about then volunteering, that complicates it, right? But I think to me, it's about open communication and having a space where you can be honest about it, some training that goes into it for the board members, to be able to really discuss it in a way that there isn't, and I will say, we had some kind of, more heated discussions, or I would say butting heads probably more than discussions in those earlier days because of this issue. And I didn't approach it in a way that was probably not confrontational, because I was really frustrated at that point, and that's not effective, right? So if there's a way to kind of bring the executive director and the board leadership together to get them all on the same page, to then coach and train the board of these things, and, put it, I'm a clear believer of like having policies and processes, right? So have it structured to where when you're a volunteer, these are the responsibilities of volunteer, and you're taking off your board hat to do that and adding on the volunteer. So it's clearly defined, because what's clearly defined is really hard to be confused about, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's allowed us in a lot of ways, whether it's been on board relations and staff relations, or, things we do internally, when it's clearly defined and everybody's on the same page with that, and that's kind of the structure, it works a heck of a lot better that way. So if that's not something that they currently do, I really encourage that. I'm certainly happy to help in a way I can, but I think really being open about this conversation and this kind of challenge that happens in a lot of organizations, and the challenge of it happening, you're either going to lose good board members or going to lose good executive directors, as we determine they're not easy to find right now. So that would be my recommendation, is having it clearly defined and do it that way. Because I will say, had we not been able to fix that, I probably would have left, because I just couldn't, when you feel boxed in and you can't do what you need to do for the benefit of this organization, it's a really hard spot to be in, right? And then you find out you're just putting out all these fires and answering all these things, you lose sight of the work because you're having to report up every single thing you're doing. And then who suffers for that? The organization and the community, right? And that kind of goes against what everybody, the board, staff, everybody's trying to do.
And it seems to be really prevalent in organizations going through a transition. Either a leadership transition or a growth transition, or, but those times of transition seem to highlight those challenges.
And I would add too, board terms. I think that's something that I hear from a lot of nonprofits. They don't use board terms, which causes this, because if somebody, they think about, they've been on the board 15 years, they're still operating from the mindset of what you look like 15 years ago. And that's no disrespect to a board member at all. I'm on a board that's that way, and I had struggled myself kind of looking at where we were when I started on the board and where it is today, because it's grown so much. So, but I think making sure you have that, so there is new folks coming in and all of that, would probably help some of that too. So.
How do you go about finding and recruiting board chairs?
Carefully. I learned a lot. And I say this because I did not understand in my early years what we needed. And I think this is probably different for every organization. Specifically with our organization, the person who is our board chair has to understand how to run a business, right? And I say this to say that, when I look at nonprofits, and like I said, I've been around it a long time now, nonprofits fail for one of two reasons, typically. Someone, leadership, that could be board or staff, has the passion but doesn't understand how to run a business, or only knows how to run a business and doesn't have the passion, right? So what I have kind of learned through the process over the last several years is looking for that person who, number one, understands how to run a business. For us, that's the most critical thing. We're financial, right? We're nationally accredited. There's all these pieces you have to understand. And I have found from our experience, when they understand that, I can teach them the community foundation stuff. I can teach them what we do. I can't teach them that part of it, to understand that, and to make sure that, you know, one of the challenges that we have, I think, in North Georgia is viewing folks who are nonprofit, that work for nonprofits, they should be paupers, right? So having someone who understands the value of this team that works for us, you know, the value of these people, that they should be paid fairly and could leave us and go make money somewhere else, you know, and then what happens to our organization, someone who gets all of that, and if they run a business and they know all of that. So I think that's a critical thing for me. I used to be like, oh, I just get along with this person really well, and that was not really a good selection process, right? So for me, that's like the first piece of it is someone who gets that, someone who I can have open communication with. And that's why we do our board structure the way it is, because we plan out who that, right now I'm looking out, you know, we've got the board chair for 24, 25, 26, 27. I'm already watching people on our board for 28, right? Because when I can find that connection where they get what we do, that we can be open and real with each other, and that my executive team feels the same way, the executive committee, you know, that's what, you know, we have these discussions as we're doing it. So for me, it's all of those pieces. It's very intentional. And again, not to say that I don't want someone who's passionate for what we do. We do so many things that typically falls in place anyway, right? So for us, it's probably a little different than how other, you know, organizations would work, but that would be how I would do it.
Thanks, Michelle.
So I know there's probably plenty of other things that need to be discussed or would like to be discussed, but we're at 1 o'clock. So what I'll do is certainly after this, you can touch base with Michelle to talk this after today, or set up a time to reach out later. But I want to thank all of you for being here. Monday, please join us. There is a dinner, 2 seatings, 100% of the proceeds go to the Forsyth County Community Foundation and the relatively new Forsyth Community Clinic, and the great work that they are doing. So join us. It's $35 a ticket, and I guarantee you it is incredibly entertaining. Most of our team wanted to go because I'm bussing tables and
Yes.
they want to make a mess. So, but join us.
Tickets available at the door.
Tickets are available at the door. You can
get them on our
also,
website.
yeah, you can buy them online, which I did for our team this morning. So please do join us. If nothing else, it is a really fun evening. It is a great
It's all Ryan Tam's best food in a buffet.
and it is a great cross section of our community who goes. You're guaranteed to meet some new people and reconnect with old friends. So come join us for that. And then Jesse, if you would bring up the next slide. So we touched on this a little bit in this event, but everyone in this room could benefit from this. We host a series. This is our 3rd year doing it. We bring in truly, I mean, some of the best digital marketing talent in the region to come help us with this. And we're starting it off next week. It is worth every penny to come participate in this. It's an 8-week series. You can do 1, you can do all 8. You can sign up, go through the schedule and look at it. But I will tell you, the feedback that we get from past participants of this, and of course, that space is changing very, very quickly. In fact, we joked about how the class that's taught at the beginning may be different than at the end of 8 weeks than what it should have been at the beginning. But anyway, so all that is that to say that historically, folks that come to this walk away saying, I built my business a little bit better because of this. I was better at reaching my desired audience because of this. I'm serving my customers better because of this. Out of a lot of great things that we do, this is one of my favorites. So come join us. You can also, you do not have to be in the room. You can join us virtually. For those of you who are further afield or just have a really tight schedule, you could join us. So, and then we're next month is Mr. Russ Wheeler. Russ is the president and CEO of Barbecue Guys. Barbecue Guys, you all have seen probably their signage at the new building at Halcyon. Russ, interestingly, in a previous life, was president of Hansgrohe and was talking about the importance of having a line of folks to become board chair. He was to be our board chair the next year, and a capital or a venture capital company got a hold of him to go do something else, which turned out to be Barbecue Guys. But he is, that company is remarkable. The Manning family, Peyton Manning and their family they're really the folks behind Barbecue Guys.
For lunch then?
Pardon? Right, yeah, that's right. Well, that's right. You bring up a really good point. Yeah, we'll do barbecue. But come join us. He is a truly world-class leader. And it'll be a great opportunity to spend some time and pick his brain.